Developers, we are now going to talk about looping through arrays. There's a number of different ways to loop through an array. We're going to focus on two main ways of looping through an array. Let's open up our live server with our little graph. And let's visualize here our simple array that we have with 4 names in here. Now, why is looping important? Looping is important because let's just say for some reason I wanted to console log the members of my array. Okay, I could simply do the following. Ooh, let me make sure. I'm just going to, hey, I got 4 friends here, so I'm going to start at 0, and then I am going to work through the list of friends and console log every single friend, every one of their names. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to see all their names show up here. That's nice. But what if I don't know how many friends? What if I don't know, and this is the thing, you never know ahead of time how many members your array is going to have. So there needs to be a dynamic way for you to do that. So we normally are going to loop through an array, and I'm going to show you how to do this in reverse. But we normally loop through an array starting at the top, and we go all the way to the bottom. Okay, so a very big thing about an array is that you need to know where it starts. We're going to start at the beginning, and the beginning is always of an array is always 0, right? If we're going to loop through from the first one or the top one, right? First one is always going to be 0, index 0. That's the first one. Now the last one is going to be identified conveniently by the last index, right? And so what is the last index? The last index, if we look at my array and you look at the property called length, length is going to be part of the formula that we need to calculate the last member of the array. And that's simply going to be my array.length. Oh no, not last index of my array.length, but I'm going to subtract 1. Okay, so no matter how many members are in my array, these two variables, these 2 points are going to tell me where I start and where I end, right? Where start is going to be 0 and the end is going to be 3. That's always going to be true, because as my array grows, the length number is going to grow, and I simply need to subtract 1 from it. So those are 2 really important items, right? Because this item is going to tell me what the last item is going to be that I'm going to log out, all right? So I just want to work that out for you. Now I'm going to show you the syntax for the for loop. So the for loop, in fact, in VS Code, you're going to have a little shortcut that if you type for, right, you're going to see that you have a number of different options. What you want to do is just go to for and hit tab. If you go to for and you hit tab, now you enter this little wizard mode. So let me cover up my diagram first so that we can focus on the little wizard mode that we've entered. It's going to give you an opportunity to rename a couple of these variables. So right now, my cursor is focused on index, and you see it's blinking. Everywhere it says index, it's blinking, because if I wanted to use a different variable for the variable of index, I could say IDX, for example. So now you'll see that all the things that said index now say IDX. If I hit tab, it focuses inside of that for loop the name of the array. And I actually might want my array, so I'm going to start typing my array, because that's the name of my array. And then I'm going to hit enter. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to hit tab. What's the name of the element? I'm going to call the current. I always like to name the element that I'm currently looping over current element. And now I hit tab and I'm done. Okay, so that's the little widget. Let me break down all the different parts of this one at a time. Okay, let me zoom in. So there are 3 main parts to a loop. You can see that they are separated by the semicolon. So here's the first part on the left hand side of the semicolon. Here's the second part right here, this expression. And here's the third part of the for loop. And this is essentially, now in English, where do I start? When do I end? And what do I do at the end of every iteration? Okay, what do I do at the end of every iteration? And so what this is going to do is going to say, hey, we're going to start our loop at index 0. Okay, that's great. Should I continue? This is what this answers. Should I continue? Is index less than the length? Yes, it's less than the length. Fantastic. So I'm going to increment, right? And so you can consider that incrementing happening at the end of the loop. But so if index is 0, I'm going to come out here and I have my current element. And what am I going to do with my current element? I'm going to console.log. I'm going to console log a couple of things. I am actually going to console log the current element, because the current element is now pointing to that particular member of the array. And I'm also going to log the index so that we can visualize this in the browser. So this is what's happening. I'm going to go over this a number of times, so even if you're going to end up rewinding it regardless. The first iteration, it declares index as 0. It asks, is index less than the length? Actually, it is, so I can do my loop. So I'm going to access the 0 member, and I assign to this local variable now as a constant. It's a constant because I don't intend to change it. Now that I have this constant, what am I going to do with it? All I'm going to do here is log it. But this is where you may do more work with current element. Like, who knows what you're here to do, what you want to do with this current element. But right now, I'm just simply logging it to keep track of it. The first time it goes through, it's the current element and then index of 0. All right, we're going to increment. All right, so as we increment, we're 1. Is 1 less than the length? Hey, yeah, 1 is less than the length, so we loop and we log 1. So we're logging Bob. We increment. Okay, good. Now 2. Is 2 less than the length? Is 2 less than the length? Yes, it is, because the length in this question now is 4. Right? So, and now we log, and we're going to log Chris, and we increment. Okay, so now we're at 3. Is 3 less than the length? Is 3 less than the length? Yes. So we log, and we log Donna. Boom. We increment. Now we're at 4. Is 4 less than the length? And no. As a matter of fact, 4 is not the less than the length. So that means that the code block here is not going to execute anymore. Okay. This code block is what gets executed one time per iteration, right? So for every iteration, that's the code that's going to get executed. And then you're going to say, you're going to console log, I'm going to console log done looping. All right, so let's go see what this looks like in our console. And there it is, right? So we're done looping. So we hit Alice 0, right? Alice is 0. Then we hit Bob. Then we hit Chris. Then we hit Donna, right? We incremented 3 to 4. And this segment of our for loop that evaluates the expression, is the index less than the length? 4 is not less than the length. It happens to be equal to the length. So then it doesn't go inside of our code block for the for loop. Okay? So we'll go for that from the top. So where we start, right, is really important. The start is the 0. The last guy that we actually want to log is equal to the length minus 1. Right? So in this example here, we're going to have the last one that we're going to log is 3. Okay. So let's erase this again, and let me put those important considerations for a for loop. The important considerations for a for loop is where do we start? Right? That's the first part. Then the expression that we are going to continue while this expression is true. And then the third part is what do you do? What to do at end of loop? What do you do at the end of the loop? So here, without using a little wizard, we're going to say, where do I start? Well, I'm going to declare a variable let idx, and I want to start. I said I was going to start at the beginning, so I'm going to say 0. I want to continue while this expression is true. So while the expression that the index is less than myArray.length, right? This is the typical expression that you're going to see here in the for loop. We want to go essentially until our index is 1 less than the length, right? Because we increment by 1. And what do we do at the end of every loop? We say index plus plus, right? So we're going to index plus plus. And now inside of the loop, what do we do? So inside of the loop, what we're going to do is grab a reference to, and this can be a const, of the current element. The current element, I have to go to my array and access the member of my array. And I'm going to use the index variable that I have. And now that I have the current element, all I simply have to do is console.log. I want to console log the current element and the index. Okay. All right, so now that I have that there, we're going to come back and we're going to see Alice, Bob, and Chris are all good. All right, so now let's look at, let's review this one more time instead of with strings. And we're going to write this again. Take a picture of this, pause it if you want to write this down. I'm going to do the same thing now. Instead of with strings, I am going to do this with objects. All right. So I'm going to type out the same objects that we've been dealing with before. Here comes Alex, and I'm going to use this as my little template. I'm going to have Bob, and then I am going to have Chris. Okay. Because it's the same thing. And then I'm going to use another name, friends. Actually, more team members, right? Just so we can see how this is going to work differently with different variable names. Team members. So here comes my for loop. Where do I want to start? I want to start my loop where I have to declare a variable. Let I is oftentimes used as the indexer. Right, I for index. So I'm going to start at 0. And I want to continue this while the following expression is true, while I is less than, the team members dot length. And what do I do at the end of the loop? I want to take I and I want to increment it. So now, what do I want to do for each? Here's the code block that will execute once for every time this loop is going to execute. So if for some reason team members, there was no team members, if there was literally 0 team members, there would be nothing console logged in here at all. I'll show you that at the end. But now what I want to say, now here's again where pro tip, here's a const because I don't intend this variable to change. Really important step here because it sets you up to use some of the more advanced array methods that you will naturally end up working with. If you start thinking about the individual members of the array as an object in and of itself, give it a name so you can work with it. So I want to give my current member, right? My current team member. That's what I want to work with, my current member. And my current member is going to go, I'm going to reach into my array, and I'm going to use the I for the index. I'm going to use the indexer to reference that particular member of the array. And I'm going to console log the current member and I for the index. Now, again, another word about current member. I try to give this name a lot of context and a lot of meaning. I could have called this C. I could have called this M. I could have called it X. I could have called it anything. I could have called it element, right? Because it's the current element of the array. But I want to give it something more meaningful so that as I write code in here, I can reference back the current member, and it just makes sense as I think through my logic. So here's my current member. The first time I go through this, again, let's go through the logic. Okay, it's 0. Is 0 less than the length? Well, the length here that I'm working with is 0, 1, 2. So there's 3 members, so the length is 3. 0 is less than 3. Good. So I execute. Great. I've executed 0. Now I increment to 1. Is 1 less than the length? Yes. So boom, I log out Bob. Great. And then I increment again, right? So this indexer is essentially moving across or down the array, right? It's moving across. So now I increment, and my index is now 2. Is 2 less than the length? Again, remember, the length is 3. So yes, 2 is less than 3. I am going to console log this next team member called Chris. Now my indexer, boom, he's incremented up to 3. Now 3 happens to be the length. Okay, so 3 is not less than the length. So therefore, because this yields false, this yields a false expression, I do not go into my code block. I simply skip over the code block, and I come here, and my loop is done looping. Okay, and so let's switch back over. What is it? My array is not referenced on line 28. Where is that? Let's hit save. My array, line 28. I should have said that. Okay. So there's Alex, Bob, and Chris. And notice how they're being logged. They're logged as their individual objects, right? That only have one property. Great. So they got logged with their indexes. 0, 1, and 2. 0, 1, and 2. There's Alex, Bob, and Chris. Now, if I were to, again, let's just say team members, I'm going to initialize it up here as an empty array. The loop is going to work. It's basically going to say, hey, I'm done looping because there was nothing to loop inside of, right? There was nothing in there. I is initialized to 0. Is 0 less than the length? Is 0 less than 0? Well, no, it's not less than 0. It's equal to 0. So there's nothing to go at it in there. So let's bring back my array. Now, one thing that's going to happen oftentimes is that you're going to get now an array here. It's the length is 3, right? The length is 3 because we have 3 members, but the index that's greatest is 0, 1, and 2. So 2 is the last one. But let me just set up a condition. In fact, I'm not even going to write a condition because if we look at our logic here, flow control is in the next folder. So what I want to simply do here is I want to show you how to use the word break. Normally we write some conditional logic, which means I don't always want to execute break. I'm going to execute break under certain circumstances. So for right now, what I want to just illustrate is the power of break and what it does. And now you've seen that I have written the word break here at the end of the loop. So what's going to happen? Let me go through the first iteration of this loop. I declare I is 0. All right, that means I'm at index 0. Is I less than the length? Yes, I is less than the length because the length is 3. So this is good. I'm going to be looping. Good. So here I am, I loop. I grab my current member. I log out my current member and the I for the index. Then break hits. And what break does is that it stops the loop. Right? It breaks the execution of the loop. It stops the loop. You can say short circuits the loop. The loop stops. If the loop was going to loop 10 times, too late. If you see the word break, if it hits the word break, it stops the loop and it goes on to the next line after the loop, which is console.log done looping. Let me make this in loop. Let me put here in loop again so you can see that in looping is not going to even fire. In looping doesn't even fire. As soon as if I take this out, you'll see I get all my members coming in, and in looping fires once for each member. If I put break back in, you'll see that in looping is not going to console log because the break hit first. And then naturally, if I put break at the end, after the console log in looping, we do in fact see the in looping logging, and it only logs once because as soon as it hits break, it stops. There's nothing to do. Okay, so that is the for loop. Okay, watch and rewatch this. Use the resources that are alongside of this particular in this lecture to go and do a little bit more research and read up on it a little bit more. Videos are great, but reading it is really efficient as well. I'm going to leave this up here for the time being, and I'm going to take out all the console logs so that we don't see it showing up in our console log. What I want to do is talk to you about the while loop now. Okay, so there's 2 flavors of a while loop, by the way. There's a while loop, and then there's a do while loop. And again, there's a variety of other different ways, like you can loop through an object, and that has a particularly slightly different syntax. We're going to use the while loop though, right? So the while loop, and if we use the while statement, hit tab, this is all that this is going to give us, a condition. So all this is a condition. If this condition in here is true, right? If this condition in here is true, the code block here, let me bring this down, this code block is going to run. So we kind of are left up to our own logic and our own mechanisms to do what the for loop is doing. Okay? So let's just do what the for loop is doing. So here's the while loop. What the for loop is doing is it's declaring a start. So I actually have a start already, right? So I'm going to start at 0. And let me move these guys down because I put these up here for a purpose. I start at 0, and then the last one is the length, right? So what we want to do is measure while true, while this statement is true, while the index, and let me create my own indexer var. I'm going to call it j. J is equal to the start, right? Which is saying j is equal to 0. Okay, that's where we want to start. The reason why I'm using I and J is because, again, I'm not the biggest fan of using short. I mean, most people aren't big fans of short, terse variable names. But it just so happens that when you start looping, the thing that you loop around, the indexer is I. And if for some reason you have a loop within another loop, the next variable that you use is J. Just get used to it, I and J. So that's why I'm putting it here, I and J. J is the indexer. So we want to say j, while j is less than the team members.length. Okay? While j is less than the team members.length, I'm going to do my code block. And then at the end, the last is, I'm going to say j++. So here are the same elements as the for loop. I'm going to start my j, right? I need to have a starting point, and it's going to be at 0. Here's my 0. Here's the condition that I want to evaluate to know if I need to execute my code. Is this condition true? If it is, I'm going to run my code block. And at the end, I'm going to increment. But, oh, I'm missing this one line. Let's grab this one line. And let's grab a reference to this member. Here's J. I'm done with my I'm done for looping. And I want to put another console log here for my while looping. And where's my other console log? I want to put a console log for my current member over here. So very similar. Let me zoom back out here. You can see that the current member logic is just basically the same. Console logging here. This line is the same as the line below it. And it is in this manner, now that I've, let me get rid of this console log as well, because I want it to be clear. I'm done while looping. I'm going to be inside of my code block, and I'm going to loop. And let's go take a peek at what this happens here. It's loading up. Okay, and there we are back. Alex, Bob, and Chris, they get logged with the indexer J, and we are done with the while loop. So very similar to the for loop. And in fact, let me grab the break so that we can see here now. Oh, we're going to error. We're going to hit save there. We're going to do the break. And so the break, like the for loop, will exit the for loop, right? Doesn't actually exit the function if it's inside a function. We'll talk about that later. But here the break exits the loop. And the rest of the code continues, done while looping, right? And that's the power of the break statement, whether it's in the for or the while loop. Okay, careful with when you do this. Now look, especially with the while loop, if you're not accustomed to it, if you don't do this incrementing step, if your expression is always going to yield true, you essentially are going to throw your browser into an infinite loop. And you all do it. It's not a bad, I mean, it's not a good thing, but it's not like if you do it, you're a terrible human being. It's going to happen. Be careful about that. If you see your browser hanging, every now and then you'll get a warning from your browser, or when you go visit other people's code, other people's pages, where a script. We're waiting around for the script. Do you want us to wait for the script? Do you want us to terminate the script? Depending on your browser, it'll have a different error message for you. All right, so then that's looping. Look, we have this object, right? So here's this object. Let me take the breakout and let me just show you that when you have this current member, you can console log the first name, right? You can treat this object. You can go back and do dot notation on this object, and now you have the actual first names as if it was a string, right? As if this was an array of strings. So this is really powerful. Create for yourself a number of different arrays with different objects inside of it. And see what happens, see what you can make happen. And then we'll continue with our Foundations course.